All right, cool. Um, should I get started, Hack the North team? It's not answering my question, Carolyn. There you go. Can you guys hear me? Prem, can you hear me? Maybe. Okay. All right, cool. Sweet. So I'll just get started. Hey everybody, thanks for coming to learn a little bit about this. I know it's the last talk of the night, so I appreciate you staying up so late or early, wherever you are in the world. So we're going to talk about negotiating your job offer. It's not going to be just about negotiating itself, but kind of a lot about kind of thoughts and processes and how you can apply them when you get your job offer. I guess I'll start on kind of who I am. My name's Jacob. I've been an early startup employee for most of my pretty short career so far. Graduated from the University of Waterloo in 2017. I also ran Hack the North for three and a half years or so. Ran as sponsorship director, and yeah, so I've worked at a lot of small companies, less than 20 employees. I worked at large companies. I of course did the Waterloo Co-op thing. All in all, I've had probably about a dozen offers in my life that I've negotiated, which isn't a ton, but I'll try to do my best to help out. Maybe the most applicative skills is I work as a partnership director as well in my spare time and negotiate hundreds of deals every year with different companies around the world. At least on that side of things, been working a lot. And if you want to follow me, there's my Twitter. So who's this talk for? So it's not for everybody. Here's what it's mostly going to apply to. So mostly technical job offers, at least the numbers that I'll use will be more related to those. So if the job offer you have is any one of sort of machine learning, software, data engineer or developer, it'll apply. Programmer, product manager, data analyst, scientist, all of that will apply. It'll also mostly only apply to North American, so US and Canadian job offers in tech. In particular, Canadian and American engineers are insanely paid compared to the rest of the world. So the offers are a little bit more reflective there as well. It'll also apply for remote roles. So I've also worked remote my entire career. So I have a lot of experience in both working remote and negotiating job offers remote. Um, and then in particular, this is probably going to be geared mostly for first full-time job offers. There's some echo. I don't know if I can do anything about that. But yeah, so anyway, there's full-time job offers, mid to late career jobs. There's just way too much variability in those offers, but I'll talk about it a little bit. And most importantly, this is for people who have job offers they have not signed. Basically, if you're reading this, it's too late. If you've signed your offer, we'll talk about why. But there's really not too much you can do to negotiate an already signed offer. Okay, cool. If you have no offers as well, there's a different talk for that. Okay, cool. I guess behind the curtain, right? What I wanted to talk about mostly is what it's like to hire people. So I've been lucky to hire, maybe 30, 40 engineers in my career so far. And hiring is uniquely difficult for everybody involved. And it's really difficult for companies. And the reason, I'll talk about the reasons why it's so difficult. And really the negotiation comes in because it's so difficult. So I'll basically give you a shot. I'll give you an explanation of how that works. Let's talk kind of behind the curtain, right? So this is kind of how you got the offer. This part you're familiar with, so it's maybe a little bit of a review. So given you've gotten an offer, congrats. It's really hard to get an offer, especially in tech. It's likely that that offer is for more money than you've ever seen in your life, and congratulations if that's the case. Um, it's really hard to get a job in tech. It's very challenging. It's very competitive, and the interview process in particular is pretty hard. So you would have had to work really hard to grind the lead code, get do really well in random pop quiz interviews, which are very challenging. you probably would have made a great impression, right? People don't get hired unless people see themselves working with those people. So you left a good enough impression to be somebody that those people want to work with. And you fit a unique need, right? So um, every job is different, every role is different, everyone that hires people has a different need. So you definitely fit that need, right? If you got a job offer, I want to stress here that if you don't meet any criteria for the job, you won't be given an offer. There's no such thing as half-assed offers. You got an offer and you deserve that offer. So be excited about that. Okay, so maybe a little bit less familiar to a lot of you is how companies decide to send offers. So companies have to work just as hard as you do to get a job, probably even harder, to be honest. And it's really hard to hire people. So here's some of the things that a company had to do all these things just to get to you, right? So first of all, they had to publish, probably an interesting, unique job posting. There are thousands of companies out there, and you need to be able to stick out somehow. So you got to put out a job posting. They had to incentivize their employees to continuously refer candidates and friends within their network. Almost 50+% of people get hired on referral. That's both important for you when considering where you want to work. Find somebody who works there and get a referral from them. But also, it's a huge source of great candidates for teams to hire. So making sure that making sure that your employees are continuously referring their friends is a constant and a lot of work to do. They had to organize a ton of interviews and facilitate, a ton of connections with a bunch of employees internally. So they had to deal with a lot of scheduling conflicts. They had to deal with a lot of time, and most importantly, it takes time away from those engineers and employees' working hours as well, right? So that's a big piece of the puzzle. And at every step of the process, they thought, should this person continue to the next step? And they measured you against every single person they've ever interviewed, basically. That's a lot of mental effort, even going through 2 or 3 people a day and just thinking, is this person a good candidate? It is exhausting, way more exhausting than I ever thought it would be. So yeah, I remember kind of going through 2 or 3 job panels, and then at the end of that being like, I don't know if I can continue working today. Like, I'm just so exhausted. It's very tiring. So that's how they kind of got to giving you an offer. Okay, so why does this matter? So hiring sucks. And I think it's important to realize that hiring sucks for everybody. It doesn't just suck for the people being interviewed, it sucks for the people interviewing too, right? So, what's important here is that if you are great talent, or great talent in general is really scarce, it's really hard to hire great people, but everyone wants to hire great people. So it's really, really hard to meet those people and make those hires. Another thing is that, first impressions are really variable, right? They're subject to bias, mood. Literally, if your interviewer is hungry, there have been studies that showed that parole judges are more lax if they've recently eaten meals. It's the same thing for interviewers. So if you can schedule when your interview is, schedule it after lunch. You'll actually have a better chance of getting through. This is a bad thing because, you could meet a great candidate and you could just have a bad day. And as a result, those people don't get through. Interviewing everybody is super unique. Every situation is incredibly unique that you have to work in. It's time consuming. It's mentally draining, like I mentioned. It's tough. In tech screening questions often demonstrate memorization rather than maybe applicable on the job training. So you have to be able to sort of extract what you've seen as well as you can, basically, which is very challenging. And then really precious and expensive time, both employee and engineers especially, must be spent to hire people. So if things don't work out, that's time that otherwise engineers could be spending building the company, building the product, or people could be using to earn income or whatever for the company. So it is a clear trade-off that you're making when you're going to hire people, a clear trade-off on time and what that time could otherwise be used for. So I mean, the big takeaway here is that great talent is really expensive to hire. Okay, and the whole point of this talk is that expense is your leverage to negotiate. So we'll talk about that. So why does this matter, right? So why does it matter how expensive it is to hire you? You're just getting a job offer at the end of the day. You're not too worried about all the time that the team has put into it, right? And it matters because that's what gives you that leverage, right? So basically, the idea is, it took them this much time to send you a job offer. Therefore, it'll take that much more time to hire somebody else instead of you, right? So there's basically a huge power advantage in this situation because the company doesn't want to have to reinvest all those resources to look for somebody else. And they've already agreed that they want to hire you. So now all of the power is on your lap. And that's something that I didn't notice a lot when I was an intern or early on in my career, but really you're at a uniquely great advantage at this point to negotiate. So you exercise that leverage to negotiate terms that work for you in the contract. If you don't understand the cost of hiring, you also won't understand how much wiggle room there is in your contract. So that's why it's important. But most notably, the minute you sign that contract, you lose all of that negotiation power. They won. They have you now, right? And if you come back to the table and say, actually, I want this much more, well, they say, well, you should have asked for that before, right? So, if you sign the contract, it's a little bit too late. There might be unique circumstances in which maybe you can negotiate for something. But in a lot of cases, this is why companies have tight deadlines. They want you to be able to start talking very quickly. They don't want to drag out the process, and they want you to sign that offer because the minute you sign is the minute they can breathe. So that's kind of why companies have these very tight deadlines. So I did a little bit of napkin math. I wouldn't hold any of this, true for every single company. This is sort of just true from my experience. So I would say on a typical hire, you're going to go through 200 resumes. So 200 plus candidates. So you're going to look at 200 resumes. You're going to filter that down to a certain amount of people, maybe 40 or 50. You'll do a quick phone screen with some of those. Then you do a couple other kind of technical phone screens. And if everything's going well, you'll sort of be dropping the funnel further and further down. There'll be an on-site interview or some kind of larger interview process. And then eventually you'll make that hire. So, you have to set up all these things and all these processes and all these interviews and meetings with almost 200 plus people before you really get down to one person. More napkin math, I would say it's about 170 hours, 175 plus hours to hire somebody. So that's the amount of manpower or people power related to a hire, so that it's time spent screening resumes, time spent in interviews, time spent in hiring boards, a lot of work. And most importantly, there's a 0% guarantee that that hire is going to work out. There are a lot of people that you hire that end up not being the right person. Hiring is very hard. So it does happen that the people you spend all this time and effort and money on end up not working out. So that's also important to note, is that it's not a guarantee. So it's a very, very tough process on the other end. So if you're a good person that's going to work out in the role, you have a lot of advantage in this situation. So I did a ton of napkin math here. There's a really big asterisk on this page because this is going to be incredibly variable. But I would say that, $15,000 to make a full-time hire is probably on the base case. Like it's sort of the lowest possible cost in terms of employee time that could go into hiring somebody. So it costs a lot of money for a company to hire people in salary and wages. This would just be in that. This isn't even including the time and the cost of that time being utilized in different ways, right? So whether that's engineers building or that sort of thing, right? So, so just keep this in mind. I put this number really big for a reason. It's a pretty big number, right? And why this number matters is I've been stressing it. Hiring another you is going to cost maybe best case another $15,000. So your leverage is basically $15,000, right? They're saying that, if I make you go to the drawing board again, it's going to cost you another 15 grand. So, that's sort of, an important thing to draw out of this. So yeah, so it's not free to hire people. That's a clear takeaway here. It does cost real financial and time commitment things to actually hire people. And it's not easy to extend people offers either. So I kind of invented this word. It's definitely not a thing, but this like negotiation window is sort of what I decided to call this. And it's sort of the range in which you have flexibility to negotiate. It's basically how much further can I extend my contract or my salary or whatever until it becomes financially viable for that company to then go and just hire somebody else instead of me, right? There are a lot of factors in here. So I don't want to say that, that's the number you should use, 15 grand. Think about a lot of different things, right? So think about sort of how unique you are for the role. Think about how good of a quality of an employee you are for the role. Think of how much the people even liked you. All these things will play a factor in changing that and scaling that number. So just keep that in mind, right? And I think kind of the big takeaway here is you've got to use that leverage to get what you want, right? I mean, plain and simple. People like to make more money. People like to have better things, and you should be using your leverage to get those things for yourself. It's not a bad thing. Okay, so negotiation, right? So what is negotiation, right? So I wanted to give a definition because I think it's always good to start with the definition. So negotiation is defined as a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. Okay, nothing here says screaming at people or yelling or like asserting authority or like some like crazy stuff you might have seen on TV and like high power courtroom negotiations. It's none of that. It's just a simple discussion, right? So I want to stress that, right? So we all have different, I think, relationships with negotiation. Some of us are maybe way more likely to turn to negotiating. Some of us are very worried about it, think of it as kind of more confrontational in nature. And I want to sort of dismiss the more confrontational approach as something that isn't really the case. In large part, negotiation is a skill in empathy more than anything else. And the reason for this is simple. If you don't understand who you're negotiating with, and what they have at their disposal and really kind of empathize with them in the situation, you're not going to be able to find common ground. So negotiation is the skill in finding common ground between two different groups of people, right? So it's important that when you do go into a negotiation, you do it from a place of empathy, right? And you say this is what I would like, and I'd love for you to do this, and then they will reply, and vice versa, right? So I think it's also important to know that not all companies are going to be able to negotiate, right? So it's very possible, especially for everybody in here who likely has co-op job offers, that co-op salary is fixed, right? I'll talk about some different ways and maybe how to get around that in a minute. But maybe some things are just fixed, right? And they've been paying their co-ops the same thing for the last 8 years and they'll never change it, for better or for worse. But some companies are like that, right? Another important thing about negotiation, it's the standard expectation for people giving you a job offer. So if you negotiate with me after I give you a job offer, you're not one out of the 20 people who have negotiated with me. You are 99 out of the 100 people. Almost everybody negotiates their offers in some way. And it is kind of the expectation when I give you an offer is that you think about it and come back to me with what you think about it. So most candidates will discuss compensation at some point in the process, whether that's at the job offer or during the interviews. It's if any of you guys are from Waterloo, the co-op, I think the CECA, if that's what it's still called, will always mention to ask for salary in the interview. That's not a bad thing. I actually recommend that. Make sure people are on the same page. And then another thing about negotiation, I feel like a lot of people think negotiation is this like far off thing that they never deal with. But actually, you probably negotiate every day. You just don't realize it, and it may just be not with a stranger, right? You may just tell your roommate, "Hey, like, do you want to go get groceries on Saturday?" And your roommate says, "Well, I'm busy. How about on Sunday?" That's a negotiation. It's not worrisome. It's not scary. It's your person. It's the person you're talking to. But you're coming to a common ground compromise, and that's basically a negotiation, right? So it just might not have a dollar figure in front of it, but you're still negotiating. So everybody sort of has some baseline skill on how to negotiate. It's just easier with friends than random people, basically. Okay, cool. So I have a slide here on when not to negotiate. And this slide is complete in nature. There is literally no time in which you should not negotiate. I would say that there are. It's weird to say things that are like in absolutes, but negotiation is one of those things where you should absolutely always negotiate. There is never a time in which you should not negotiate your job offer. So I wanted to echo that point pretty obviously with a big blank empty slide. Okay, cool. So this sort of applies to also the conversation around what can be negotiated. So most of the time people just negotiate their salary, right? I think it's pretty natural to do that. It's the big number that's the first paragraph of the job offer. It's the one that feeds you, and it makes sense to negotiate your base salary, and you absolutely should. But Actually, every single line on your job application or on your job offer is negotiable. Literally every single sentence. If you don't like a sentence in it, you can ask to have that taken out or changed. Um, you can do literally anything. So I listed, some examples outside of salary, but you can negotiate vacation time. If you want to take more than the 2 weeks off, see if they're flexible. You can negotiate your benefits and the timeline in which they set in. It's a little bit harder to negotiate benefits, but most companies will have a 3 month window before you kick in your benefits. You just have to have that right away. A lot of the time, they'll just give it to you. Of course, you can negotiate your equity, your profit sharing, what have you. Of course, you can negotiate your signing bonus if that's on the table as well, or add a signing bonus if it's not on the table. You can even have a travel stipend. You can even negotiate an office schedule. What does that mean? Well, let's say it was before COVID and your company was like, we want you in the office 5 days a week. Maybe Thursdays and Fridays you work from home. You can negotiate that into your contract. You can negotiate post-education studies. Let's say you want to go get an MBA and you want them to pay for it. You can put that in your job contract. You can do anything. And a really good one that I really like having people put in their contracts is an actual expectation of when we should chat again and review your performance and basically your salary band, right? So basically, like in a job offer, you can say in 6 months down the line, I'd like to set up a meeting and where I get feedback from you and we talk about how I perform according to the company's kind of different bands and see how things are going. And if I'm within a certain band and I've exceeded the expectations of the current role I'm in, I'd like to get a raise and a promotion. You can put that in your contract to have a kind of a quarterly review with your manager, 3 to 6 months down the line, and have your salary revised. Can be in the contract for sure. You can even secure an expense account, per diem, food every day. Again, anything you want can be put into a contract. Anything is up for negotiation. Whether or not that happens is a completely different story. But just to kind of give you an idea of really what is possible. And then maybe the one thing that's not on this list that can be stressed, I said at the beginning, is if there is a clause in that job offer that you're unsure about or uncomfortable with, a lot of the times those can be negotiated as well. There are certain legal requirements from companies for like compliance reasons, and in that case, likely some of these things cannot be changed. But in a large part, companies are happy to adjust even their standard boilerplate if necessary. So just keep that in mind. So I think the important point here is, negotiate not only for the salary you want, but the life you do too. If you want to have vacation time, a little bit more vacation time in your life, negotiate for that, right? If you want to, have, XYZ, if you want to work from home, negotiate for that, right? So, really anything is available. It's not just the dollar sign at the beginning of the offer letter. Literally anything can be negotiated for. Okay, cool. So I want to talk about some of the common fears or things I've heard from people as I've talked to them about negotiation over the years. I would say the number one most common fear is, what if they retract my offer? So the answer to this is they will not retract your offer. If anything, I hope this talk has shown you that it is extremely expensive for companies to get to the point where they send you an offer. And for them to just retract it because you'd like to negotiate is insane. It is financial suicide for that company. So it's very, very rare for this to happen, right? So unless you've been through like a lot of rounds of negotiations of back and forth, and it's clear there's no common ground, companies are not going to pull the offer. It just doesn't make financial sense for them to do so. And let's say that you were working for a company or got a job offer from a company, and they did do that to you. You really have to consider if that's the right company for you to be working at, right? If anytime you bring up salary or bring up a negotiation topic and they dismiss you, that's not going to be a healthy place for you to look for a raise in a year and a half from. So, keep in mind that's probably a good company to steer away from. That would be a red flag in my mind. And then, yeah, I mean, what happens with a negotiation almost always is, 2 or 3 quick conversations, and then there's an agreement. It's almost never the case that there's no common ground found. So sometimes the agreement is still not within the range that you'd expect as maybe a candidate, and then you'll just not take the job offer, but typically you'll settle on a number pretty quickly. Cool. Another common fear that I see is, how do you know if what you're making is a reasonable request? Or what if you make an unreasonable request? The simple answer is they'll tell you, right? They'll say, oh, we can't change that. Or, oh, yeah, that's not something we've done before. They'll just tell you. It's not a big deal. They'll just say no, right? And no isn't a bad thing to hear. That probably means you're actually negotiating properly. Another common thing is, I don't want to inconvenience the team. They've worked so hard. They've gotten this job offer to me. I don't want to put any more work on their plate. I really want to work for this company. So, I mean, first of all, the function of the person you're talking to is to hire you and to hire you as a happy employee. That means that their job is to negotiate with you. So you're not inconveniencing them. You're just applying their job. So I would never really worry about that. And then I kind of shoehorn this point in here. But I think it's an important realization is that, nobody's really going to negotiate for you. You are the only person in the world that looks out for you, and you know what's best for you, right? So nobody's going to go to the, go and kind of argue on your behalf or say, actually this person deserves a much better thing, maybe unless you're friends. But really you're the one who's negotiating for yourself. So it's really important that you negotiate, because if you don't, no one will for you. And that last point there is kind of related. Actually, I think my offer is already pre-negotiated. Job offers are not pre-negotiated. There's no such thing as a pre-negotiated job offer. That makes absolutely no sense for a company to ever do. So, your job offer is not pre-negotiated, and you need to be negotiating your job offer. Okay, cool. So how to negotiate. So this is probably what everyone thought this talk was, but it's really going to be one slide. So there are, first of all, a million resources on how to negotiate. And of course, every negotiation, just like every job offer, is very unique, right? So I don't want to be the one to give you sort of, exact ways on how to negotiate things. Rather, I'll give you some tips on sort of high level things that always, are the right approach. But if you want to get into the nitty gritty of like, how to negotiate and, XYZ, there are a lot of resources out there. I put, I think, one or two in the hack pack, but really, if you just Google, how to negotiate, you're going to get a million people with a million different ideas. So this is just sort of 4 quick tips that come to mind, right? So the first part about negotiating is, you better probably be researched when you do so. It would be to the point of like very confusing if, say, I offered a salary of 110K to somebody and they came back, they're like, how's 300? Like it doesn't make sense, right? So make sure you're sort of at least educated on what can be achieved within your band. So what that looks like is, you can pop on Glassdoor, you can see what other people at the company have said they make. You can look at average salaries for a role or job title in the city or area you have the job offer for, and see how you measure up, right? If you come to the negotiation table with, basically receipts on like what you think you should be making, that's a far more compelling case than just kind of screaming out a random number and hoping it sticks, right? But the screaming out a random number approach does work too. Cool. Number 2 tip, get on a call. This is like one of those things where it seems very awkward, but actually getting on a call is probably the least awkward way to do this. Like I said, negotiating is a skill in empathy. Emails do not have empathy associated with them. Emails are just text. It's very hard to express any emotion over email. And over calls, it's really easy, right? So I think getting on a call is probably the most critical approach here. If they like you, it's even better because then they'll jump on a call, they'll be reaffirmed that they like you, and they'll be like a little bit more sympathetic to your cause. It's really important to jump on a call. So, all negotiations really should be done either in person or on a call for the most part. If anything, think about it this way. The call is probably going to take 25 minutes, but crafting that perfect email is going to take you like 6 hours and an absolute ton of stress. So just do the call. So number 3 is just be flexible and responsive. The worst part in a negotiation is, there's some back and forth, and then nothing happens for 4 or 5 days, and it's like, okay, what happened to this person, right? So, being able to sort of go with the flow and go and back and forth as kind of quickly, as flexibly as possible makes sense. So, basically, if you're negotiating your job offer, don't be the blocker until you get a number you're happy with, and then think about signing that offer. but don't be the one blocking that conversation. Always make sure that the recruiter or whoever you're dealing with is the person who's slowing down the conversation. And then, one way to just do this really well is have an idea of where you want to end up before you start the negotiation. Just kind of sit down and think to yourself where you want to be. And then at least you have that as a reference point so you can go back and forth. And then the last thing is, this is a very challenging part of negotiating, but know when you've really hit the edge. There's really only so much a lot of these people can do. It's very rare, I find, for people to be, this is like the best I can do, and then actually like 30% more is the best they could do. That doesn't happen as much. It's maybe 5 or 10%. And if that 5 or 10% is really pushing it, it's probably not worth the risk to go that far. So sort of know, like, where the edge is, and make sure that at least the conversation ends in a comfortable way for both parties. So yeah, it's not always perfect. It's not always perfect. Cool. So I mean, a lot of people worry about sort of that first sentence. What do I say to start a negotiation process? Just say, how flexible is this offer? It's not hard. It's just kind of an easy sentence that says, I'm interested in negotiating this offer. 99% of the time, you're going to get a reply that says, yeah, we're happy to chat, and the negotiation starts, right? So this is just a nice, easy sentence that'll lead you into it. But of course, you can use whatever you want, right? Okay, so I want to talk about edge cases in very CS fashion. So yeah, so basically a ton of edge cases with this. Like I said, everything is incredibly variable. So I want to talk about a couple unique situations that may apply to some of you. Okay, so startups. Honestly, this talk could be this slide could be an entire talk. Startup negotiation is just as variable as they come. But by and large, at a startup, you're going to get an offer that has both an equity and a salary component. So the salary component is your yearly salary, which might be useful, and equity in the form of options is ownership stake within the company that you're actually going to be working at. So over time, as you work there, you gain an ownership percentage of that company. So important things to realize, salary feeds you, obviously, so make sure that the salary can cover your costs at the bare minimum, if not more. But your equity might allow you to own a small country someday, right? So if the company really does do incredibly well, that equity percentage might, end up having a serious impact on your life. So, there's a ton of discussion around equity versus salary. I'm not going to be the person to settle that debate, obviously. But, do what's right for your situation, right? It's a relatively true rule that you can decrease your salary for a higher equity percentage. It really depends on what stage the company is in. That would really only apply to early stage companies. And then most companies have their ESOP, which is the employee stock option pool, is around 10% of the total available shares in that company. So don't expect kind of an offer that has like 8% equity, because basically that'll drain the pool from most other people. Again, this is kind of a standard by the time companies get to a Series A. In a seed round, it's a little bit different. But yeah, again, I guess kind of the point being here is that startup compensation is really, 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 really variable. So there are some startups that will literally pay you $0 and pay you in sweat equity, which is a term for like being paid in only equity rather than get a salary. And there are other startups that are incredibly well funded, working on really big problems, that will quite literally pay you as much as you ask them for. So the range here is quite large, right? It's important to kind of understand what startup stage it's at, so what funding stage those startups are at, because that does change what is possible to be doing. Pre-seed and seed is incredibly flexible. Once you start doing price rounds, so like an A, a B, especially a C, it's starting to get really way too late for there to be a lot of flexibility in the equity piece. And I think kind of by and large, the startups are going to be more stingy with equity than you might expect. For instance, I don't know if I didn't think this at least going into it, but 0.5% as a fifth employee is actually pretty good. There's kind of a lot of reasons for this. The main reason is like down the road dilution is a big deal for companies. So that's kind of a big reason why these offers are pretty low. But 0.5% is actually a pretty good ownership stake in a company at a startup. So just keep that in mind. So it's not crazy to see 0.001% These are real numbers, but of course you can try to ask for more. And yeah, again, this is a really big topic. There are a lot of really great talks on this by people at Y Combinator who are much better at running startups than I am, have run thousands of startups and seen kind of the whole 9 yards. So I really recommend taking a look at Y Combinator's YouTube channel. It is, possibly the best source available on Earth when it comes to startups. So take a look. Okay, massive companies. So this is your FANGs, your like insane, well-established tech companies, the ones that have stocks that are traded on the public market. So I'd say recently as a trend, most of these companies have sort of limited the scope of negotiation in their early stage roles. Not the case for their late stage roles, but for their new offers, new grad offers. A lot of these companies now have internal guidelines that they have to follow pretty closely. So in general, it's a lot more restricted. I say it's a lot more restricted because it used to be pretty wild west, not gonna lie. Some of my friends getting, offers in the 500,000-600,000 out of undergrad because these companies are insane. So they've really reeled that in. But us old people remember the golden age. So it does depend. There is, I would say, kind of one big asterisk here. If you are a truly exceptional candidate, so I'm gonna say, 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 candidates that go through as a new grad, they will probably pay you anything to work at their company. So keep that in mind if that is, the person you are. First of all, good for you. And second of all, you'll probably be set for the rest of your life. So they will happily pay an arm and a leg to hire you. With these larger companies, you'll be negotiating for salary and equity. Equity here is going to be denoted in dollars and not percentages. So at a startup, it will be a percentage of the company. At a startup, it will be a certain amount of shares in that company, so public stock, if they're publicly traded, at a certain dollar per share, so they'll be in dollars. And that's important to notice. And then, of course, all of this is negotiable. And typically, large companies have signing bonuses, also negotiable. And then one thing to note, though, is that these large companies also hire a ton of people. For that reason, they have economies of scale when they do hiring. So previous calculations I made might be off. It actually might be cheaper for them to hire people just because they put so many people through that funnel. Of course, if you're Facebook, Microsoft, Google, everybody on Earth is applying to you. They don't have a lot of inside costs and hiring and getting the word out for their companies, so they don't have to worry about that as much. Remote and contractor work. This is going to be a big deal right now, obviously, because nobody has offices. So, your salary is one piece of the compensation, but it's not everything. So on average for a full-time hire, the total cost to hire that person, let's say I give you a $100,000 salary, is going to be 30 or 50% more. So it may end up costing, $150K for me to employ you. There's a lot of reasons for this. One is insurance, benefits, paying for the office, the supplies that you use. There's HR costs, there's payroll costs, there's all these costs, right? So there are a lot of things that go into hiring an employee and paying for an employee than just their salary option every month. So I think what's important to consider when you're joining as remote employees is that a lot of those costs are not either borne by the company anymore or exist at all, right? If you're a remote employee, they don't have to pay for an office for you. They don't have to pay for those meals every day that happen at Google, right? So, what does this mean? Their loss is your gain. Basically, every dollar they don't have to spend to hire you versus somebody else is a dollar that can go into your pocket. So, keep that in mind as you go through this. If you are kind of joining as a contractor or a remote employee, a lot of the time their costs are going to be lower, which means you can ask for more money. Simple as that. So give it a shot. And then one quick note around intermediate plus offers. I know this talk really wasn't for these people, but it's helpful for you, everyone watching, when you go and do your second or third job after your first one. I don't know where all the employees go. So there are a million junior software engineers, and then I have never seen another intermediate software engineer in my life. So I don't know where they go. They're impossible to hire, and they're the ones that companies want to hire. So take that 15K from earlier. It's going to probably cost you at least 100,000 to hire an intermediate or a senior software engineer. I know that sounds insane, But in Silicon Valley, for instance, there are a lot of companies who specialize in hiring senior employees, and their carry is typically 50, 60% of first year salary. So if you negotiate 250,000, that's 125K. That goes to that firm. So it is very expensive to hire very good senior talent. So you have an insane amount of negotiation power. Basically, everything I talked about, multiply it by some insane scaling factor. And one important note is you can actually just create roles for yourself if you're like really skilled in a certain thing. You can just convince a company that they need this type of person and that you are that type of person, and they will, in a lot of cases, just create the role. So keep that in mind. That's something you can do. Okay, cool. So that summarizes everything I wanted to talk about. Hopefully this was helpful and gave you a lot of context on sort of what it's like to be on the other side of the room, and how all the stress and pain that goes into hiring people on the company side can be directly used to your advantage in negotiating the heck out of your offer. So yeah, so I encourage you to take a look at negotiation resources if you want to learn how to negotiate. Again, I stress that you negotiate every day of your life, and you have built this skill already, and it's just a little bit different, a little bit of tweaking, and you'll be able to negotiate like a pro any salary that gets thrown your way. Okay. Oh yes, Sarah, I was going to talk to you. I forgot to put a slide in about that. Okay, I'm going to scroll up before I get to all the questions. Okay, cool. Okay, so Celeste, okay, so Matthew said, what about people with no offers? I said there's different talk for that. Okay, so Celeste said, wait, so as far as you know, these standards won't work for Europe. So everything I just said in terms of negotiation is going to apply to Europe. It's just going to apply less so. The typical job offers in tech in Europe are lower as a dollar figure than they are in Canada and the US, especially in the US. And basically the larger, you can kind of think of it as percentages, right? If you're able to negotiate your offer by 10% and your offer is 120,000, that's another 12,000. If your offer is 60,000 quid or something, then that's 6,000, right? So, sort of the dollar figures and the kind of calculus around the numbers change a bit depending on where the offer is. So that's what to keep in mind. Of course, negotiating your offer is the same expectation in Europe, and you should continue to negotiate everything. So that all of that applies. It's just the actual numbers change a bit. Okay, so what do you say from Iris? What do you say if you're joining an APM cohort at a big tech and they say that it's non-negotiable? Yeah, so I think I covered it in a couple slides. I think you asked this before I covered it, but I would encourage you to negotiate other things other than just the salary. It's likely they can find some weird hack. So to give you an example, I had exactly the same experience. I was working for a company in New York. They said, as an intern, they said, intern roles are non-negotiable. And I said, okay, that's cool. I have this person who I would like to go see in Toronto. And I was wondering if I could get a travel stipend, $200 a month to get a flight back to Toronto, like a round trip flight to Toronto. And they were like, okay, cool. That totally makes sense. We want you to make sure you're seeing your loved ones in Toronto. So, but we can't do travel stipends. And I'm like, oh, okay, that sucks. And they're like, okay, well, what we can do is we can take that $200 a month, and then we can prorate it over all the hours you would have worked that month and add that to your base salary. So my non-negotiable base salary went up by another like 50 cents an hour or something. So all the other interns were making exactly what they were supposed to make, and I was making 50% or 50 cents more, just because I asked a random thing about a travel stipend. So this is possible. I've had it done in real life. So even when their salary is non-negotiable, they might be able to move on other things. Hopefully that helped answer that question. Celeste asked, can startups offer visa usually? Of course, startups are very happy to offer you a visa. Visas are a whole other complicated question, but in general, if you're working for a full-time offer, you'll need to either have an H-1B or a TN if you're Canadian. The H-1B is kind of challenging. It's a lottery-based system. We'll see if Biden opens it up a little bit more because Trump actually restricted it during his presidency. But the TN is quite easy to do, and companies in the US are very happy and in many cases adept at hiring international people to fill their tech roles. Okay, bunch of questions from Sarah, so I caught back up. So Okay, so is it possible to negotiate without competing job offers? How do we negotiate the salary if the salary was stated at the initial HR call? Okay, cool. So good question. So what I wanted to talk about is having no competing job offers. You do not need competing job offers to negotiate your salary at all. In fact, you should be negotiating all of your salaries independently for as many job offers as you have, and then at the end, start getting them fighting for you. So you don't need to have an offer to negotiate your salary for sure. And then if the salary was originally stated at the beginning of the interview process, that's a good question for you to think about and say, hey, is this the right salary for me? If it's really far from what you want, it's unlikely they'll be able to compete with you. And maybe you should end the process. Or if it's close, start having that discussion earlier. If they want to have that discussion early, feel free to do so as well. One thing I didn't stress in the talk at all, but is very important, is that interviews are as much is kind of bidirectional, right? So it's not just the company interviewing you to see if you're a good fit. You should also consider yourself interviewing the company to see if they're a good fit. If their salary is way off where you expect it to be, or where you want it to be, or what you previously were making, and that's a big sticking point for you. Put that as part of the consideration for yourself, and maybe end the process earlier, right? And tell them why. It's helpful for the companies to get that feedback. Okay, second question from Sarah is, do all companies that hire for new grad positions offer stock options and signing bonus? Nope, this is up to any company's discretion. So for instance, most startups will not offer a signing bonus. Some will, most will not. Some companies will offer stock options, some will not. It depends on the role. It depends on a ton of factors. Again, if it's not in the contract, maybe you can negotiate for it. If it is in the contract, you can negotiate it up. But yeah, there's no set standard here. What I talked about were sort of generalizations rather than necessarily the kind of eternal truths, if that makes sense. Okay, so it's 3. So what if you are offended or afraid of offending them by asking for more? Yeah, so I kind of covered this. You're not going to offend people. I mean, basically, like, first of all, it's their job to basically field your questions. And second of all, like, just think of sort of, your day-to-day life. If somebody offers you a suggestion, how often are you offended by that, even if it's something you don't want to do? Probably rarely offended such that you never want to talk to that person again. It's just not really how negotiations work. Basically you just say no, and the companies will just tell you no, and it's not a big deal. Okay, cool. And then the last question from Sarah is, can you renegotiate your offer after signing the offer and working there for some time when you move into another position in the same company? Absolutely. And I didn't talk about this because this is just about the job offer negotiation, but you should be setting up, and it's probably best for you to take the authority to do so, to set up a meeting with your manager every 8 months and say, how am I doing? How do I get to that next piece, right? It can be even faster. If you think you're on a better pace, set it up even quicker than that, right? I think, if you're a high performing employee, companies want to keep you. And absolutely probably the worst thing is that if you're a high performing employee, you feel like you're not getting enough money, but you never ask for it, or you never ask for that next thing or that promotion, and you leave because you weren't getting it. In a lot of cases, that might not be the company's fault. That actually might be your fault. So in a lot of cases, companies want to keep you happy. Once you're in and you've proven yourself, oh my God, yeah, I mean, your salary can accelerate like crazy. Because at that point, the risk of giving you more money and you not turning out a success is almost zero. So absolutely, continue negotiating. At that point, it's not negotiating your offer, it's negotiating your compensation in general. But yeah, set up meetings with your manager and talk about these things very publicly. It's definitely appreciated. Okay, so a question from Michael. Question for remote jobs: can you negotiate working hours? Like if you're in a time zone on the other side of the earth. This is going to be company specific. Obviously, the biggest difficulty of remote is time zones. At least that's been my experience. Yeah, it's going to depend. What I think most companies are doing is they sort of have core hours, which may be the hours where they have the expectation that everyone is awake. Those could be at totally disjointed hours from the hours you want to be alive in. So yeah, it really does depend. Can you negotiate it? Sure. Again, you can negotiate anything. So if you want to have it in your contract that you're not going to work at 4 in the morning in your time zone, put that in your contract. But again, this is probably a conversation you should have earlier into the process. And frankly, as somebody who hires a lot of remote employees, it's a conversation I have very early in the interview process anyway, just because I want to make sure that they're aware that they might have a stand up at 8 p.m. at night, right? So kind of sucks, but it's the way it is. Okay, from Carolyn, how much less does it take to hire an intern? I'm not sure what that means. I think like in terms of like the process and cost and everything. Um, so there's a couple factors that go into hiring an intern. So one thing is that in a lot of cases, part of your salary can come from a grant. People may not know this, but if you hire interns and you're a Canadian company in Canada, basically the minimum wage salary in a lot of cases is covered by the government. They may have changed that under Ford. I haven't hired Canadians in a long time. So, part of your salary is going to come from some kind of grant-based system, and part of it will be from the actual company. In terms of process, typically there's less time spent on hiring interns because, frankly, if you're hiring somebody for 4 months and they don't turn out well, it's not a big deal. It's okay to have duds for 4 months. So in a lot of cases, companies don't spend as much time. My company in particular, we spend the same amount of time because we treat the co-ops and our interns exactly like full-time engineers. So to the point where like they get exactly the same work. So if they're not competent, it actually hurts us. So it does depend on the company as well. But in general, it's generally cheaper to hire interns, if at all, just for the reason that intern salaries are also much lower. And then Hattie asked the question, why is compensation in the United States so much higher than in Canada? I actually don't really know why that would be the case. So in general, the United States has a lot more money than Canada. Basically, anything in the US can be times 10x. So the US is essentially an order of magnitude of a bigger market than Canada is. It's actually a little bit more. So in terms of, in particular for compensation, startup, the amount of cash a startup has in the bank does impact that a lot, obviously. And venture checks in the United States are much larger on average for much lower percentages of companies because the United States has so much money. So I would have to say that it's in large part because of the venture capital market in the United States that helps inflate these salaries. And in some cases, like for San Francisco, cost of living is also a little bit higher than it is in some other cities. So of course, if you want to hire talent, you need to hire them in a way where they can afford to live where they work. So yeah, and then Matthew asked, do companies still get an intern grant from Canada if they're not co-op students? I believe the answer to that is no. I believe that actually the co-op designation is important for them getting that salary cut. I'm pretty sure that's what the program is. But again, I haven't hired in a long time, so. Yes, Taha's asking the question from now the interview side of things. Okay, so not related to negotiations, but since you've interviewed so many people, what have you noticed most candidates lack or struggle with? This is going to sound weird, but I think one of the most important things going into an interview is making sure you actually want to work for that company. It is incredibly easy to detect if somebody is just there because they have been randomly posting to job postings and they just happen to get accepted by us. It is very easy to detect that. I think people are really good at kind of sniffing out otherwise kind of disingenuous behavior. So typically, a really common question in an interview is like, why do you want to work for our company? Or like, what stuck out to you about the company? It's very easy to answer that question in a very passionate and genuine way if you're very excited about the company and what the company can offer you. And it's very easy to be spotted for being disingenuous by answering that question if you're not actually interested in that company. So I want to stress that there are thousands of companies that are hiring people. And it might seem the way that, obviously it's a numbers game as well. But there are just so many companies that are hiring that you should feel probably confident enough to only apply to the companies that you actually really truly are interested in working in or working at, or companies that you think will level yourself up. I think that's totally a valid reason to join a company as well. Is, I want to join your company because I think it's a great way to learn this certain thing. That's also an equally valid reason too. Have you received cold emails, and what were the most effective ones? Yeah, so cold emailing is a whole other topic. So, I mean, it's going to sound crazy, but the most effective, and also, I mean, I do partnerships, so I also do a shit ton of cold emailing, like thousands of cold emails I've done, probably tens of thousands at this point. Step one is A/B test your cold emails. This sounds insane, but actually be data driven about your emails. So, send out 50 in one manner, send out 50 in another and another, and see how those different variants affect each other. So that's step one. Depending on what you're doing, the cold email should be crafted differently, right? So I personally haven't done too many cold emails for job opportunities. The reason for that is actually because I joined Hack the North, and the Hack the North network is really, really good. And I've been able to utilize that network and connections for referrals. In fact, every single role I've held since I graduated can have its line drawn directly to Hack the North. So if you're in this call and you're like, man, it would be great if I could join the Hack the North team, highly recommend it. It definitely pivoted my career completely. So yeah, anyway, on the cold email topic, I think also being genuine here is important as well. So, there's a couple things. So in a cold email, it's important to be direct. And that goes for the negotiation piece as well. But if I get a cold email that's like, hey, I'm really interested in this company, and it seems pretty cool, and you seem pretty cool, thanks. It's like what am I supposed to do with that, right? Like ideally there'd be like a clear takeaway, right? So if you want to cold email someone, I would expect that a good cold email that I would like to receive would be, hey, I've noticed you've been at this company for this amount of time. I'm really curious about your experience at the company. I'm this person. I've done this in the past. I'd love to grab you for like 15 minutes and just chat. Here's like a Calendly link for my availability, right? And the reason why I think this would be good is because I think it's short, and it gets to the point, and it gives me like a clear call to action, which is like, just click on this Calendly link and book a 15-minute call, which takes me 5 seconds, right? So I think that might be a good approach on the kind of the cold email side of things. So yeah, I'll try not to give away all the Hack the North secrets on why our cold emails are so effective, but the Hack the North sponsorship team has about a 40% open rate on our cold emails, which is insane. So, but that was because we A/B tested. So A/B test your cold emails. Anyone have any questions? I don't have to go anywhere. I am hiring. Thanks for asking, Celeste. So I work at a company called lunchclub.com, which is also an absolutely great platform to find people that may end up hiring. Lunch Club introduces you to a relevant person every week for a one-on-one meeting using machine learning and AI. But yeah, we are hiring. Lunchclub.com is the website. And we have a link at the bottom for active job postings. We have hired interns in the past, both from Waterloo and from other schools. And we hire remotely, globally, and it's a lot of fun. We're still a small 20-person startup that's pretty well funded and doing pretty well. Yeah, so Michael asks, what is A/B testing? So A/B testing is, it's a term used in computer science. Basically, the idea behind A/B testing is you want to have a control and experiment groups, and you want to change various things within those things. So you can imagine that one thing you'd want to A/B test is maybe the subject line of the email that you're sending out. So what you would do is you would send out 50 of those with one certain subject line, another 50 with another subject line, another 50 with another subject line, and see what the open rate is between all of those. And in particular, if you're A/B testing very well, what you'll do is you'll sort of always pick the winners and continually iterate on whatever content or subject line or whatever you're using to get to sort of the optimum version that sort of performs the best. if that makes sense. So it's a very kind of data-driven approach to sort of picking winning content. A lot of companies do this too. So if you work at a company, you'll probably see A/B testing at some point if you're a tech person. Okay, so Celeste says, if I'm not an official CS student, a lot of people aren't official CS students, so I wouldn't worry, but I'm majoring in STEM and do a lot of Udemy and stuff, is that still valuable? So I'm hugely biased towards people who have non-tech backgrounds working in tech. I think that the diversity of opinion and the creativity that a lot of these types of people bring is really, really important at a company. So I actually prefer candidates, I'll just kind of strictly say my bias, that have a non-traditional tech background. And I think that is absolutely valuable. One of the best ways that you can show, at least to me, that you're interested in both is to apply tech to your non-official CS background. So if you found a way to sort of merge both your interests and sort of what you want your career path to be, that's an amazing thing. So yeah, I think absolutely, I don't think you're at a disadvantage at all. In fact, most of the people who work at Lunch Club do not have a computer science degree. How much does your university you go to matter for getting co-ops or jobs? Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. It depends for every company as well. I think that your university clearly has an impact on how often you get selected for an interview, because universities act as a filtering mechanism in a lot of cases. So I think that I think it does impact that. One of the clearest things to me on like where or what university you go to, how much it matters for getting jobs, is in terms of the network that you build when you're at that university. Again, I mentioned that most job hires are from referrals. So the people that you know and the people that you connect with during your undergrad is critically important towards being able to do so. So if you go to a prestigious high-class university, is more likely that more people from those universities will end up doing interesting things or have a lot of great connections that you can also utilize. So to me, that is the clearest way in which your university impacts your future career, if that makes sense. Like basically Harvard on your resume means nothing unless you're also friends with people who went to Harvard. Okay, and then Carolyn asks, with COVID, some companies are considering modifying offers / localized offers. Oh, such a bad idea. From USD to Canadian, how do you handle the situation if you've signed the US offer, but you know they plan to localize? Tell them that you're not going to put up with that shit, basically, is the best way to answer that. I don't think that, talent is the same price regardless of where that talent is. I think that's, really important, right? Like, I don't think that, just because I happen to decide where I live, and where I live has a slightly cheaper quality of life, doesn't mean I should be paid less. I shouldn't be punished for making that decision. I think a lot of companies are very incorrectly making this decision as a matter of simply saving money as a cost cutting thing. And I think it's foolish. I think in the long term, it's not going to work. So yeah, I would push back on that and just see if they're flexible to do that. The one thing is that specifically on the currency, it might be difficult for them to pay you in the currency you want. I know that in particular, it's nice if you're making US dollar in Canada because you're making 29 cents extra. But judging on how their HR is set up or how payroll is set up, that might be more challenging for them. So I would look at total comp after Forex exchange rather than necessarily the currency in which you're being paid. Can we help with Tech North even though we don't go to Waterloo? We did hire one person from Laurier once. He was all right. He eventually became sponsorship director. So if you're outside of the Waterloo area, it's a little bit harder in the past just because we used to do everything in person. I don't know what it's going to be like now. But yeah, you can, of course, be a volunteer, which is helpful. But for what I'm particularly talking about the networking connections, Well, look at that. Being a volunteer is helpful-ish for that, but really being on the team is pretty helpful. All right, apparently we let Laurier on the team. I thought I made the like one-time exception of all time, but apparently we're cool with Laurier now. I mean, to be fair, Darren worked out, so it's okay. Did I answer every question? Did I miss one? Nope. Cool. Any other questions? These questions have been great, by the way. I'm happy to keep going. I don't have anywhere to be. Can we LinkedIn you? Yeah, let me figure out what my LinkedIn is. How does it even work? It's like /in. Yeah, okay, I got it. There we go. There's my LinkedIn if you want to connect. Okay, cool. Question from, oh, I also speak French, so look at that. In terms of degrees, I know you talked about non-tech backgrounds, but in terms of tech backgrounds, are CE, SE, CS equivalent? So it's computer engineering, software engineering, computer science, I'm guessing. Yeah, I don't see why those aren't equivalent. And in fact, that's why I did computer science instead of software engineering, because it seems like the same results, but I didn't have to take science. So yeah, as far as I know, I mean, again, like, you know, the kind of extension of my point about having non-tech background degrees is that, you know, the actual degree you have is less important to me than the fact that you do have a degree, frankly. So sort of, yeah, the extension of that is that, yeah, obviously I think those are all kind of the same because I'm really not too worried about what that degree actually is. And definitely not worried about your grades. If anyone's worried about grades for jobs, grades are for grad school. Most hiring managers I know have never looked at grades. Do tech companies care about diversity? That's a great question. How do I express the views on this without doing anything illegal? Yeah, so maybe I can just vaguely talk about the challenges here. So, so first of all, yes, kind of I think unequivocally at this point, most tech companies do care about diversity. One of the challenges in diversity is that also hiring people according to you know, certain aspects of that person is illegal. So the best way to kind of hire for diverse people and diverse opinion is to be able to create, you know, very welcoming situations for anybody. So, you know, if your company has a tech bro culture, most of the people who apply to your company are going to be tech bros. So it's important to kind of make sure that your company is as open to people of all kinds of backgrounds as possible. But yeah, at least, you know, from my perspective, I absolutely care about hiring people from diverse backgrounds and people who are underrepresented in tech, especially because I run a community as a company, and our community has people who represent all backgrounds. And it's very difficult for our team, if we were to be a homogenous team of, let's just say, like, you know, mid-20s guys in tech, to answer questions from our community, right? You know, we have people from all kinds of backgrounds who have concerns or issues with our product. You know, I want to have somebody on the team that can represent those people and be the cheerleader for those people as much as possible. So, you know, in particular for me, I think it's very important that our team reflects the diversity of the people who use our product. So that's why, at least for our team, it's really important for us to have a diverse set of people. Question from YouTube Live. What are some unusual things that people have negotiated? From Claire. I mean, frankly, I think people could stand to be more creative here. I put that slide in mostly because people are not very creative. They almost only negotiate full-time salary and rarely anything else. I would say that kind of anything on that list would be anything that isn't base salary, equity, or signing bonus. If you negotiate anything on that list aside from that, I'd be pretty impressed. So yeah, most people tend to not negotiate outside those three categories. So I honestly haven't seen anything. yet. But again, only hired maybe about 20, 30 people. Yeah, so can we get increases in health insurance? This is unlikely, but of course it's worth having that conversation. The reason this is unlikely is because most companies have all their employees on a fixed plan. That plan only works because everyone is negotiated to the same insurance. So typically these are standard. But your company might have a secondary plan that only the execs are on, and maybe you can negotiate for that one. I don't know how common that is, but in general, um, I've only seen the exact same benefit plan my entire career. Um, I haven't asked to have it negotiated because I never use my benefits anyway, because I'm like, a 20-year-old yuppie. But I'm sure you could ask. I just don't think it's going to be that possible from my experience in terms of benefits. But for health insurance, it's free here. You're in Quebec. Isn't it free in Quebec? Yeah, yeah, that good therapy. I'm into it. I'm into it. Yeah, I think the only benefit I ever used was in massage therapy because like it's pretty nice. Cool. Any last questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to wrap up here. If you have any questions, you can send me a message on LinkedIn. You can send me a message on Discord. I'm around. So yeah, feel free to just reach out. Thanks everybody for coming. And Hack the North starts tomorrow. Get hyped. Looking forward to seeing what you guys build. I'm judging on Sunday, so build something cool for me. All right, see everybody.